Welcome to the Hole in the Wall Business Podcast with Bill and James. I'm James Groves, and along with my business partner, Bill Dement, we want to share our journey as small business owners with you. As owners of Hole in the Wall drywall repair, we will attempt to peel back the curtain of owning a small business in the trade service industry and talk about the many adventures of owning a small business. Hey, Bill.
James, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Never met today's guest.
I know.
Until he was just a few minutes ago. Mm-hmm. But in just a few minutes of greeting each other this morning, it's obvious that this is a person of substance.
Yeah, and it's hard in the pre-podcast. We were just kind of talking. It's like there's so much we want to say. Oh, we better save that.
Yeah,
for the show.
we had to pause him a couple of times to make him save it for the podcast.
Yeah, I hate the words "without further ado," but I'm going to say it today.
Yeah, let's get right in on this.
Without further ado, I would love to introduce Sanjay Parekh with Amson Consulting. Sanjay, welcome.
Thank you so much.
We're so glad you're here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Sanjay is someone that many of our friends know and have consulted with. He's a business strategist. He helps small business owners, and he's got a great story, and I can't wait to kind of dig into it. So welcome, Sanjay. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, James and Bill, for having me
Yeah,
here.
welcome.
Appreciate it.
A lot of fun. Well, let's enlighten our audience, kind of like who you are and tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I'm excited to share that. Actually, I'm a business strategist and management consultant, and I run a company called Amson Consulting, where we help businesses to make strategies that are sustainable and that are profitable for their businesses. I think every business is looking for something like that. So I do that and also conduct 2-day business management workshops, which is called the Entrepreneur Success Academy, where we share 8 key strategies how a person can master the art of business. It's meant for students, it's meant for people who are just getting into the business as an entrepreneur, as sometimes we jokingly say it, even if it's good for a solopreneur, as well as people who run companies with a lot of employees. So there's something for everybody. And I think, there's one of the things that I really remembered is that as no matter how advanced science and technology is today, but the laws of physics remain the same. The same way, no matter how advanced or no matter what business it is, the fundamental principles of running the business remains the same. My work has taken me to a lot of different countries, and I still have to come across an entrepreneur or a business owner who says, I don't want to make money. Everybody wants to grow.
Yeah, that's why they're in business.
Everybody wants to grow. So there's just something that I thought of putting up a program together where people could get real-time information on what would be the necessary steps that they need to take in their business in order to succeed. So that's what this is about. And then there are a few other things that I help the businesses with.
Wow. So obviously you didn't start there. I mean, you have a lifetime of experiences leading up to this consulting business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you even think about getting in that idea? I mean, where'd you kind of get this business knowledge from?
So actually the seeds were sown when I was just about 9 years old. I was born and brought up in India, and I grew up into a business family. I remember when I was about 9 years old, I was, for my summer vacation, visiting my dad in his office, and I was just going there to have some fun because I had nothing better to do.
Right.
I was just trying to kill some time. So my dad said, why don't you come over to the office? So I went to his office, and his staff was obviously, me as a little kid, the staff was taking care of me. They used to get me ice creams and chocolates and, things like that made me have fun. Once when I was there my dad was not there in his office, but he was out for some meeting. So I saw his chair was nice and big, and it had those little wheels that as a kid, I was very thrilled. So I sat on his chair, pushed my legs against the desk, and I was kind of, moving around and having fun. So my dad walks in and he asked me, he said, Sanjay, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just having fun. I'm playing. So He said, you know whose chair that is? I said, yeah, I know. It's your chair. And he said, well, I happen to sit on that chair. That chair belongs to the chairman and the CEO of the company. You must always make sure that you're worthy of sitting on that chair.
Wow.
As a 9-year-old, I had no idea what that meant. I was like, okay, dad's not happy with me playing. So I just kind of, got out of the chair. I went home. And then I said, I'm not going to go there to the office again because dad does not like me playing. But since I said, it was a business family, the business was always discussed at the dinner table. So I used to hear one thing from my father very often. And he said that you must always first deserve and then desire. So I kind of took it very seriously and I said, you know what, I'm going to make a name for myself. I'm going to get some knowledge before I even sit on that chair. So when I was about 17, 18 years old and I was in college, I had my breaks. I used to go to the factory. We used to have manufacturing plants. We were in the industrial packaging business. So I used to go to the plant. At that time, the first time, nobody knew who I was.
Right.
And, I was stopped at the gate. And I literally had to kind of apply for a job. Only my general manager, and it was a new guy who didn't know me, so he appointed me. And 3 years prior to that, when I used to go to the plant with my dad, the security used to open the gate. They used to salute my dad, and we used to just go in the car. And I thought I was the king of the world, but only to realize, that this was something that I had to really be very cognizant of. This is another side of the life that I had never experienced. So it was a bit like the undercover boss, but I was the boss's son. And I worked on the shop floor. I gained knowledge of the production that we were doing. And then from there, a few months later, I became a supervisor. And then they all realized who I was. But I was always having meals with my colleagues who were the regular workers at the plant. And so, they knew me. So we had a different equation. And then I was like rotated in every department that there is in a manufacturing organization, from quality, production, accounting, purchasing, inventories, everything. And after about 4 to 5 years of intense training, I then came on the board of the company. So in the meantime, and over the next few years, we grew from one manufacturing plant to 6 different manufacturing plants. And we were one of the largest companies back in the day, and we were listed on the National Stock Exchange, the Bombay Stock Exchange. So we were listed, we came up with an IPO and all that stuff. So the business was going good till we decided to go in for some backward integration and set up our own paper mill. The timing was not so right. And, our issue was the lead manager to the issue had problems, and, the whole thing went down. And over a period of time, we had some cash crunch and the business went down. We had to shut off 4 factories out of 6. And then my father suggested that, I should try to do something on my own, because then it was not making sense for all the eggs to be in one basket.
Right.
So I started a small company of my own, and then I had in the packaging industry, and then I had one of the largest companies in the world based out of Germany buy equity in my company, and we became partners. And from there on, I was the country head for the Indian operations, and I was managing that, and we became profitable from year one. We worked in close proximity with my dad's company, so we had contract manufacturing arrangements. That is how it all started. Over the next few years, we had operations, because this was one of the largest companies in the world. So we had a total of 18 plants in 18 different countries. And we had offices in 24 countries, sales in over 110 countries. It was pretty large operations.
Yep.
Some of the operations in Vietnam that we had was not doing well. So a lot of other people had gone to solve it, but then Thomas, who was my partner then, asked me to take a look at those operations. And I didn't know much about it, but we successfully managed to turn around that loss-making company into profit, which they were about to sell. And they were about to hire a consulting firm to turn around the other company that we had out of Shenzhen near Hong Kong. And that was not going to be profitable. So I suggested them to shut it down. Until then, I didn't know that I knew how to read the balance sheet or the P&L. That was my first time, and it just worked out right. The board decided that that was a good approach. So we did that. And then I got included into the global board of the organization. So I was the youngest at that time. This was in the early 2000s. I was the youngest. I was on the board of the company where we were about 11 members controlling operations, in so many countries, in 24 countries. That's how, and then I was in charge of our operations in Asia, and I was heading 7 countries at the time.
At the time you were living?
I had moved to the US. I was living in New Jersey, but then I had to travel to Asia every month, which was too much. So I decided to relocate and go back to India, because I was developing our market for the Americas, and I was in charge of that also. But then, long story short, with all those managements, then I got involved, and then my partner wanted to sell off the company in 2010. So Thomas wanted to exit the business. He wanted to sell off the company. There were about 12 companies that gave a bid, out of which one of the companies was identified. And I was a part of the team that was negotiating with the company. They had hired McKinsey to do the due diligence, and I was a part of the sell-off process. So we got involved. And that year, that company bought over, they acquired our company. Then they acquired the second largest company in the world out of China, the third largest country in the world out of Turkey, and the largest distributor in Europe. So 4 acquisitions 1 year, making it a substantially large company, a dominant player. That company was based out of in the US. It's again listed on the National Stock Exchange. And what had happened was that they had an ambition. The accumulated revenues for the business was about $500 million. And they had an ambition that by 2015, we will reach $1 billion. But the strategies that they had on mind, I was not quite convinced with that. Being an entrepreneur myself, I thought that every business has got some nuance and some, trade secret that is important that they know it. Otherwise, there are chances for failure. So I did give them my suggestions, but, what do I know? They had McKinsey, they know much more than what we do. So they decided to go that way. And I thought that was not the most optimum way of operating. So we decided, let's do a deal. Either I buy you out or you buy me out for the operations. And then we sat across the table, did a deal. I sold off my equity to them. And I decided to move back to the US. I had some other ventures on mind. And I came here, and only to realize that the company in 2015, which was supposed to touch about $1 billion for this division, I took a look at the results, and they went down from $500 to $230 million. And I said, I saw that coming. So my wife at that time encouraged me, and she said that, Sanjay, this is not just the first time, but you've kind of said it a couple of times in the past that this is not going to work, and it's not worked. So why don't you help small businesses? Because the ratio is that 90% of the businesses fail within the first 5 years. Probably not all of them know all the tricks and trades of the business. So I thought, that would be a good idea, because when you have large consulting firms like the Boston Consulting Group or the McKinsey's and several others, they are actually there to assist big businesses who've already got millions of dollars. But for the small businesses that are the backbone of the economy, they don't really have very many people to advise them and guide them.
So you were talking about, I want to touch a little bit about that. You mentioned McKinsey a couple of times. And for those of us who may not know, what is that company? What companies of that size, what are they hired to do?
So companies of that size, there are multiple things that they do. They would help companies prepare strategies for growth. There are companies that would help them to probably reduce their costs, to get them more profitable. There are companies that guide them what would be the industry future outlook, so whether they should get into that or not. So they advise, they pick up some of the brightest minds, some very intelligent people from some of the best, management schools, and they work. And there are multiple other, from technology point of view, from many different aspects and arenas that they are there to support and help. And this is global, right? They are not just located in one country. They are out of the US, but then they are all over the world.
So it's a global business consulting company.
Yeah, and they will typically work only with large companies.
That's right.
Yeah,
wow, interesting.
That's right. Because they would have a few $1 million as their fees, so not very many small companies can afford that.
Yeah, I guess not.
Yeah.
Not us, at least, for sure. That is fascinating. So you just took us down a road where you started off as a young man in business, saw an example in your family into manufacturing, into big, large corporations. And now you're able to take that knowledge and bring it into guys, small business like myself. And I love the class idea. So your typical client is whom for that class? You mentioned solopreneurs and students. Do you actually have people that are just starting off?
Yes, I have actually had all sorts of people. I've had, people who have been in business for about 8-10 years. Some of them have been in businesses for over 20 years. Some of them have just been, from a financial advisor to an insurance agent to a printing business to someone who's just going to start off and is quite unclear about what they really want to do, whether they have what it takes to be an entrepreneur or not. Because it's not just the willingness to do things. Because a lot of people who have great ideas think that they can be successful, but not everybody succeeds. So what does it take to succeed? An ideation without execution is nothing but an illusion. And that is where we try to help people, like these are the skill sets, because execution is a very important part of any business being successful. As they say that an average idea but a good management can make the company very successful, but a great idea with poor management does not make, that can fail a company. And we've seen several examples of that. So that is something that, I have about over 35 case studies that I discuss with them over 2 days, walking through all the different 8 aspects of what is important for them to take care of at all points of time. And this is something that can be held valid no matter which country in the world, no matter what kind of business it is. That can be actually always, you can go back to the worksheet, to the workbook, and you can always refer to it, when you come across a situation where you don't know which way to go. Because sometimes we are pushed into the corner, we have our back against the wall. We don't know what to do. Whether should we go left, whether should we go right. It's just the same thing in businesses, because business is very dynamic. We are faced with a lot of external challenges.
That's right. We actually, last week on the podcast, we were talking a lot about the business cycle.
Yes.
And it's called a cycle for a reason. It happens. It goes up, it gets to the top, it goes down, it gets to the bottom.
Yes.
And since business has been running, this has been a concept that's valid.
Very interestingly, a business cycle is something that I think almost every business goes through, right? Mm-hmm. You have some months that are good, you have some months that are not so good. But more important than that also, because once you've identified the cycle over a period of maybe a year or two, then you know that which are your best months, which are your, slow months. Mm-hmm. But what is very important is also to identify where in the organizational life cycle your business is. So we do give some, tips of identifying where are you in the where's your organization in the life cycle of the business? What are the challenges? And you identify that through some of the challenges that you go through. What are the positives and the strengths that you have when you are in that cycle? How do you overcome that and then go to the next cycle, the next phase of business rather? And the next phase, what will be the challenges that you will come across? And what are the plans and the steps that you should take ahead of time so that you know how to navigate your way through it more successfully and that you don't get stuck? So those are just some of the things, talking of organizational life cycles as well, that becomes very important for an entrepreneur to know where they can have the next problem.
So a life cycle, I think I'm going to learn something today about this. Can you talk us through that a little bit on kind of, what are some things that businesses need to look forward? What are some of these points in the life cycle of a business?
So typically, to keep it at a high level, you have, when a business starts, right, at that time, everybody's very excited. They have all the strength, the vigor, the zeal in order to make their business successful. So at that time, we call that as a honeymoon trap. You're just starting out with something new. Yep. You're excited.
A lot of excitement.
A lot of enthusiasm in getting things done. But then soon you hit, a low patch that kind of can have you thinking like, whether did I get into the right business or not? What just went wrong? Normally, business owners are, a lot of times I have seen with my experience, are in a denial mode. They don't expect that things will go wrong with them. They think that I'll sail through this. Through this, right? Mm-hmm. But then they need to be...
That's kind of the nature of an entrepreneur, though, is they tend to see the glass half full.
Exactly. And while that is not a wrong thing, but you have to be realistic, right? You cannot be a pessimistic, but you have to be a realistic and understand now what are the next steps do I take in order to get through this. So then you have, then there's the success trap. So when they hit a low patch and they get through that, and that's where we give an analogy and a story of 3 feet from gold, which is where, if you already know that story, how that actually transpires into somebody just falling short of actually hitting the gold. So we explain that story at that point in time. And then there is a success trap. When you are already very successful, you don't think that you can make a mistake. Yeah. Usually business owners at the time think that I have already done so many right things in my career, in my business, that I know I'm doing it the right way, only to realize that now there's going to be the next turn. And if you're not prepared for it, you can have a problem. So, then there's this denial trap. So there are multiple traps. How do you identify? Those are some of the things that we teach in detail in the workshop. And that's just one part of the entire program.
Ready to start your own business? How would you like a jumpstart? Hole-in-the-Wall Drywall Repair is now offering franchise opportunities for strong entrepreneurs. When you franchise with Hole-in-the-Wall, we help you get up, running, and ready to start generating revenue. fast. You get access to our comprehensive training program, continued support, and our proven business model that has allowed us to experience explosive growth. Achieve financial success while providing a valuable service to your community. Take the first steps towards achieving your entrepreneurial dreams. Go to HoleInTheWallFranchising.com.
I'm curious. I am familiar with the 3 feet short gold story, but I wonder if you might just take a minute and tell that story briefly.
So this was, I think, during the gold rush time. There was this family that, was also exploring, and they wanted to dig gold. So the gentleman sets out, and he is the one who is trying to extract gold by digging. And he does get some gold, and he's very excited. But he tries to dig again and again, and there's nothing that comes out of it. So he decides that, just having usually a hammer and a saw or something like that, it's not going to work. So I need to have actually proper equipments. So he borrows money from a lot of people, buys some of the best equipments, and starts digging gold. And he digs gold. He starts getting some gold because he thinks that, over a few truckloads, he'll be able to pay back all the debt, and he'll be free from that, and he'll be successful, and he'll be a very rich man. But then, they just hit that low that there's no more gold coming out, and they keep digging, but then the gold doesn't come out. So then he ultimately decides that this is not for me, and he sells all the equipments at a loss, and he's got a huge debt, and his nephew decides to pay that off because he was a part of the transaction. So then he sells it to a scrap dealer. And the scrap dealer, when he buys it for nothing, all the equipments, he buys them for nothing, was actually also a smart guy. What he decides to do is he hires a geologist and asks him to do the survey of the land and finds out where the gold is. And after the survey is done, the geologist suggests to him that just where they stopped digging, the gold is only 3 feet from there. And he starts digging it, gets gold, gets a ton of gold, and becomes a super rich man.
Yeah.
And that's the story that the nephew, who decides that I want to pursue this thing in a more strategic manner rather than just going, all guns blazing. I got to be a little more strategic.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, that's probably the best retelling of that story I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. And I've heard it multiple times.
Thank you.
Wow. But it's so poignant. How many times do we put out our best effort, and we go as far as we can to a point of frustration, and then make an emotional decision, or maybe even for that gentleman, it was a financial one, to turn away from it. And somebody else just picks up where you left off. And in just a minute, they're
exactly,
with a right technique, with a right approach.
That is true.
They find success.
That is true.
Well, perseverance through a hard time is one of the hardest things to do as a business, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, in my mind, because we've had a few other ventures that we started working on, and we got into and realized that this wasn't for us. But there are times when, even in hole-in-the-wall drywall, it's a struggle at times. Like, it's a niche market, the economy's different, personnel can be different, and learning the balance of how to navigate is being able to decide this is where it needs to end versus this is where we need to lean into it. Mm-hmm. On last week's podcast, we actually talked about this a lot, is that we've had a rough 2 months. June and July were a down month, not just for us, but for the entire trade service industry. Mm-hmm. All my buddies who are in it are having the same thing. So what do? Do you stop, do you just kind of ball up and don't spend any money? Or
right.
But one of the things that we talked about is you actually lean into, you market, you take that opportunity to educate, you take that opportunity to build your brand when you're slower. Our crew was slow for a couple of days, and so we brought them into the warehouse and we trained them on how to do certain items, right?
Wonderful. Yes.
But knowing when to do that, knowing how to do that, that's the trick as a small business owner.
That is true. That is true. And you rightly suggested that probably when the business is a little low at that time, you get more into marketing and things like that. But, I also have another take to it. While this is one of the right things to do, I think one of the best time to market is when you're really very busy. Mm-hmm. Because when you're very busy, at that time when you're marketing, at that time you can afford to be more selective. and you can afford to have your rates up. Because everybody says that the simple rule of making money is, sell the product at a higher price. But how do you sell it at a higher price? That's always a struggle. Nobody tells you how do you do that when the competition is offering something for a lower price. So there are different techniques. Those are some of the sales strategies that we discuss to identify, what would be a more appropriate policy or an approach for your business that one needs to adopt and to move with it. And we have seen that with the implementation of certain unconventional methods of working, people have been very successful.
Well, I agree. I think that there's always this brand awareness. We call it the plate, spin the plates. We talk about being able to kind of keep certain plates spinning. Like, Coca-Cola doesn't necessarily need to advertise at a NASCAR event.
Yes.
But they're going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they want to be that top of the mind. They want to be that big brand.
I was in a meeting once. There was a global conference that we had, and I met one of the very senior executives who was formerly working for Coca-Cola. It's one of the most recognized brands in the world. And I was just asking him, because being always curious, I'm always learning every single day. I wanted to know what really makes Coca-Cola so successful. So while, of course, they have their secret formula, but what are the most important things? And he gave me a very wonderful example. And then when I thought of it, I said, it's simple, but we just don't consider that. He said that two things that are very important to Coca-Cola is, number one is visibility. Second is availability.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one very striking example that he gave me. He said that, there are some of the most highest traffic areas. Let's say if it is New York, Manhattan, right? Mm-hmm. Super busy. There's seldom for you to even space to drive the car, leave alone park a big truck. Right. He said that sometimes they would, go to a very busy district while they are offloading their, from merchandise to the local retailers. It's just out there. They do not mind paying a parking fee of $500 during the most busiest hours.
Oh,
but at
interesting.
$500, they get advertisement that at that peak time, when there are 1 million people going, the cost is nothing.
Because that big truck's a big billboard.
That's a big billboard.
Billboard.
Those are the kinds of, little different structures of working. I don't necessarily say that they violate the law, but what I'm saying is that they realized that once when something like this happened, and they said that we just didn't realize that $500 was the best spent money. Mm-hmm. They could, because immediately they had to refill all the merchandise again, because so it's visibility and then it's availability.
That's good.
It's simple, but it's effective.
Yeah.
That's what the point.
One of the things that we've found really important in our business specifically, and I think it's probably true of a lot of businesses, differentiating yourself.
Yes.
And we've had this conversation recently. Drywall repair is drywall repair. Mm-hmm. Like Coca-Cola is Coca-Cola, but you have to differentiate yourself. And if you have a differentiator, you stand on the roof and crow like a rooster.
Absolutely.
Without that, what are the things that differentiate you? If you don't have that, then it settles to the lowest common denominator, and you now become a commodity. And commodities are always sold on price.
That is true. You make a very interesting point, and that's one of the issues that I always discuss with a lot of people. I ask them usually one question: who wants to be the best? In my workshops, I have asked this every single time, and everybody will raise their hand. I want to be the best. And that's where we bring in a difference. By that, what I mean is that I say that, if you want to be, the biggest, right? If you want to be one of the biggest players, if you try to be the best, you will be number one, right? If you try to be the best, you will be number one. But if you try to be unique, you will be the only one. So how do you make yourself unique? And that is what you're, alluding to as far as standing out is concerned.
Right. And on the opposite side of that is avoiding becoming a commodity.
So how do you differentiate yourself, your unique strength? Because you have small, smaller, smallest. You have big, bigger, biggest. But you don't have unique, uniquer, uniquest. It's only unique. There's only one, and that is you. So if you identify what your niche is, and if you then try to work along those lines, and it does take a little bit of working to identify that, there are ways that you can identify it, and then you know what is the area that you really want to focus on. For example, the biggest burger chain in the world, McDonald's, correct? But then one of the most preferred, Chick-fil-A, If Chick-fil-A would have got into the same arena as just McDonald's or Burger King, they would just be the third or the fourth one, correct? But then they decided to differentiate themselves.
Right.
And that's why they stand out. Likewise, there are many businesses that, once when they decide to take a little different route in the direction in which they want to go, to identify what is your unique strength, because every business has some unique strength. It's also important to know what your unique strength is. And those are some of the things that, we kind of walk people through, that this is how you identify it and this is what you do. And then based on that, if your marketing campaign, your marketing strategy is based along those lines, you'll be more successful. Let me give you another example. When you have Domino's, right? Domino's, what is it known for? Pizza delivery in less than 30 minutes.
Right.
Several others have tried to emulate that. They have tried to copy Domino's and try to say that, we can give you the pizza within 30 minutes. But come to think of it differently. If the other chain, if you were to start your, if you, in the sense, anybody, if the viewers or the listeners were to start, they want to come up with that. If they, in order to try to be unique, if they would actually come up with the slogan that, we take 15 minutes extra for our pizzas, but we know our pizzas are really well made.
Yeah, it's worth the wait.
It's worth the wait.
Yeah.
Correct. So small little nuggets in a lot of things that if we try to focus from a different angle, then I think it can be something that can really propel the growth of a business in a stronger way.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. Off microphone earlier, we were talking a little bit about a unique opportunity that happened to you during one of your classes, which kind of led to something else that you're doing now as well. I'm curious if you could tell that story a little bit, because not only are you with Amson Consulting, but you're the CEO of a very thriving business.
Yes. So that, again, happened by accident.
Yeah.
I've had several participants who have attended my workshop. One of the friends, also decided he had a business that he had started maybe a few years ago. And he attended the workshop in order to try to understand what he can implement in his business, what he should be doing, shouldn't be doing. While he was doing that, I subsequently, after the workshop was done, a couple of weeks later, I decided to have a one-on-one with him, asking him, what is it that, you need help with? Is there anything? Because I make it a point to personally meet with all the participants. I just don't want them to get lost in the crowd. It is, and I get this inspiration from, we all like to read. I like to read a lot. So when I read a lot of books, when you start reading, you've got so many different ideas that you pick up while reading the book, right? Yeah. But when you reach the last chapter, how many do you remember? And after that, when your book is shut and you put it away for a few weeks, how many do you really remember?
Right.
So that is something that happens when we attend a lot of programs, conferences, workshops, right? We hardly remember what we've learned. And I don't want the participants to just come attend and not really gain anything out of it. So for that reason, I meet with people one-on-one. So when I met this friend of mine and I said, what is it that you took away from the workshop? And he said, I took away one thing. And I was like, a little question mark on my face. What do you mean one thing? You were there for 2 days. And he said, yeah, one thing, that I can't do this by myself. I need your support. So then we discussed, and I joined him as an interim CEO for a few months. First, I started working as a consultant. I used to visit him a couple of times a week to help him develop strategies for his business. I understood after I did a business audit. That is something that I like to do. I did a business audit to understand, where his business exactly was. And I then could come up with ideas and suggestions of what the strategy should be. But then he was finding it a little difficult to implement those strategies. And then he asked me to join him. I joined him, and then subsequently the investors and the board of directors, they met with me and they told me that they would like me to run the show. So now since about a year and a half, I have been a full-time CEO working with a company. We've managed to successfully turn it around, and we are growing.
Wow.
Yeah.
You okay plugging the company? Because I'd love to.
Absolutely. It is known as First to Aid, EMS. It's an emergency medical services business where we have ambulances. We do interfacility transports from ERs to hospitals to skilled nursing facilities in 5 counties, currently in Central Florida.
Wow, that's crazy. It's really impressive. And obviously he saw the value in the class. So obviously you're doing both.
Yes.
But that's kind of your focus right this second.
Correct.
Just going back to Amson real fast.
Yes.
What is the average class size?
So It is a small, limited class.
Yeah.
I've had up to about 15 to 16 people from, it would be roughly around 8 to 10 people on an average. So I've had as many as 16 people. And I've had someone as young as 21, 22, and someone as old as 65. Attend my class. So different businesses across different spectrums, because again, the fundamentals of running a business remain the same. So some of the things that we focus on, and I did mention in the past that there are 8 key strategies that we help them master the art of business. So some of them would be like, one is building a strong foundation. That's the first thing that I start off with. Why people think there are some people who have said like, I'm just a single guy running my business. Why do I need to know? Why do I need to build a strong foundation or have a big team? Because just as we say that, a building is strong because of its foundation, that a tree is strong because of the roots. That it's a strong tree when it has been able to withstand some of the hurricanes. The same way, there are a lot of hurricanes that we have in our businesses on a regular basis. You don't know where it's coming from, and you don't have a season for that. It can come in at any time.
Right.
It could come in because of your cash flow crunch and your business sinks. It could come in because you've lost a big contract and you don't have enough money to take care of your business sinks. There could be so many external factors. The governments have changed the policy. There are some guidelines, some rules and regulations changed. So how do you know how strong a business is? That is all going back to the foundation. So there are about 7 different elements in the building a strong foundation that we go through in detail. Then we discuss about robust sales and marketing strategies. So while everybody now, how can this be equivalent and good for everyone, no matter what business it is? It is because I just don't like to discuss about, you should sell more at a higher price and you'll make more money, because that's just such a generic thing.
Sure.
But people don't know how to do that, right? So first of all, we've got to understand the psychology of buying. Why do people buy? Then we understand the psychology why people don't buy. So how do you get through that, and then identifying what would be the product or the service that you're offering, and how do you position yourself? Because positioning yourself correctly into the market is one of the most important things that people don't really pay that much attention to. So understanding that, and then it is developing a high performance team, because eventually you will need to have team that is how you grow. People don't much focus on that. And it's not developing a team, it's developing a high performance team. So there are some different ways to develop that. And that is one of the things that we focus on. Now, what happens is that when your business is growing, what is going to happen to you is that you're going to be short of time. So how do you manage your time better and not work, for 15 hours a day, but manage your business successfully?
Yeah, so far this sounds like a very familiar scenario.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is what all businesses, even successful and a growing business like yours, goes through those kinds of challenges that we need to be aware of. Then we discuss about, creating a sustainable and a scalable business. Normally, when businesses are growing, they want to just kind of grow, right? But without understanding what the sustainability level is. So I am a very big believer of developing businesses that are sustainable, not just scalable, because scalable businesses can fall and they can fail miserably. We just saw that FTX exchange, right?
Yeah.
That scaled significantly, but then it was not sustainable.
Right.
So
and there may have been some fraud there as well.
Of course, in addition to everything else. And likewise, there are some of the things that you don't have to do in business, which is something very important. Like, what is the phase of business or the stage of business when you reach to that point, what you don't do? Normally, it is just a trap that a lot of businesses get caught into it. My own father's company, when I was working, we got caught into that. And that's why we had to, shut down some operations. So learned something from real experience. And then there are, some how to be an effective leader. Because if you are an entrepreneur, you're going to be the leader. But the most important thing is how to be an effective leader. As we say normally that, boss is someone that you have to follow, leader is someone that you want to follow.
Right.
So how to be an effective leader. And we again go through several case studies and discuss some of the most successful strategies that are out there for people to follow, some of the best names that we admire a lot. That is one thing. And then some growth hacking strategies. How do you, to your point that you were making earlier, Bill, of how do you make a plan that you're going to be unique? How do you make a plan that, you are going to kind of face the competition head on? Normally, it's like, as they say, it's a cutthroat competition. It's, like a Red Sea everywhere because there's blood all over the place. So
Right.
how do you enter into the Blue Sea where there is less competition? So identifying that gap, and there are some very amazing growth hacking strategies, which, we discuss, and how can you identify that and how can you try to implement that in your business for you to grow successfully and become the one to reckon with. So these are the kinds of things that we actually walk people through in 2 days.
Wow. In 2 days.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
No, it's beyond cool. It's impressive.
We're both a little stunned for a second. Sanjay, we've been at this for a little bit. I want to keep talking to you. I think that you have a lot to say.
Beyond that, he has a lot worth hearing.
Yes, and obviously Bill and I, are learning from you, and I know that our audience is learning from you, and our potential franchisees are learning from you. And if someone wanted to get a hold of you, how's the best way for them to do that? If they wanted to tap into this just a little bit more.
Sure. So there are a couple of ways to do that. One is for people to just visit my website. That is Amson, AMSON, consulting.com. My email is sanjay@amsonconsulting.com. And then my phone number, I'd like to just give my direct number. I would answer it myself. It's 407-782-4466. That's one of the most effective ways to get in touch with me. And then there is a lot of information that is already stated on the website that people can understand, because over and above all these things, I also I'm certified to do talent development assessments and different types of studies that actually improve the human performance. So there are 5 different studies that we do, and I'm certified to do all of them.
Excellent. How about we pause this where we ended here, and let's invite you back to come. I would love to dig a little bit deeper into this. I think that, there's a lot going on here, but I don't want to suck up all your time today. And maybe our brains need a chance to digest what we just learned and listen to. But I really encourage everyone to kind of go to your website, look at the resources you have available out there. And then we'd love to have you back on to maybe dig a little bit deeper into some of these insights. You'd mentioned just a little bit about the talent. That's going to be, I think, a whole other podcast. I think that's going to be some great stuff there.
Well, absolutely. I'm excited. And thank you so much for having me on the show. I enjoyed talking to both of you, to discussing things and, sharing some stuff. I am happy, and it'll be an honor to come back again.
Excellent. Any final thoughts, Bill?
No, I'm good, but I'm excited about Sanjay coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Well, thank you everyone for listening. It's been a great show. Appreciate it. We'd like to thank you for listening to the Hole in the Wall Business Podcast with Bill and James. We'd love for you to join our Facebook group and keep the conversation going. If you'd like to learn more about us and our business, check us out at holeinthewall.com. If you'd like to learn more about how to start a Hole in the Wall franchise, go to holeinthewallfranchising.com.